Why did she sit down in the middle of the firing line, her rifle perfectly sighted, her breathing calm, yet not a single shot fired? The others whispered, some smirked, some sneered, but none of them understood. None of them saw what Colonel Harrison saw from the observation tower above. He'd watched soldiers break before, hands trembling, eyes wide with fear, every shot scattering wide. But this wasn't that. No, Reed wasn't trembling, she wasn't nervous. She wasn't even distracted. She had looked through the scope, measured everything, and then simply decided not to fire. The range grew quiet once the whistles blew. Brass littered the dirt. Everyone's targets bore holes, smudges of paint, scars of effort. Hers stood untouched. Perfect silhouettes waiting for bullets that never came. And she just stood, calm, rifle slung over her shoulder, walking off as though nothing unusual had happened. Whispers followed her like smoke. Sleepwalker. That was the name someone muttered first. It spread quickly because it fit. But what no one knew, what even Reed herself wasn't sure she wanted to admit, was that her silence, her stillness, was more dangerous than their noise. She felt it that night in the barracks when she sat cross-legged on her bunk, pretending to rest. Her laughed 2 bunks over, mocking her, joking about her nap time and 0 for 30 record. Blake led them, of course Blake, the captain who believed the world owed him deference simply because of his lineage. He strutted through training like a man convinced his bloodline alone guaranteed survival. And maybe it did in wars fought on paper. But Reed had seen wars that never made the record books. Wars fought in alleys, in shadows, in places where no one carried flags. She closed her eyes, but she wasn't asleep. She was cataloging voices, footsteps, breaths, every sound placed on an invisible map inside her head, a map she had been building all her life. That was the first thing about Reed. She was never really resting. Harrison knew it. He'd seen her eyes the moment she stepped off the transport van at Fort Benning. She scanned her surroundings with habits no drill sergeant had ever taught, measuring distance to cover, angles of approach, fields of fire. Old instincts, old scars, the kind that couldn't be filed away in a personnel record. Still, he didn't intervene. Not yet. Soldiers revealed themselves in time, either by action or by inaction. And Reed, in her stillness, was revealing more than any after-action report ever could. The next morning brought the obstacle course. Sweat and dust barked orders, bodies straining against wooden walls and ropes that mocked their strength. Soldiers grunted, cursed, clawed their way over. Reed approached, her pace steady, deliberate. She looked at the wall for 3 seconds, then sat down in the sand at its base, cross-legged, eyes closed, breathing slow. The other soldiers gaped. Blake shouted something crude. Mitchell cursed. Carter laughed. Wilson, the youngest, simply stared in confusion. But Reed just sat there, as though the chaos around her was nothing more than wind. She remained like that for 15 minutes, while her squad bruised and bled and fought their way across the course. When they finally looped back, she rose, brushed the sand from her uniform, and rejoined them without a word. The whispers grew louder after that. Sleepwalker, dead weight, she's going to get us all killed. Blake's contempt sharpened into open hostility. Hope the enemy waits while you take your nap, he spat, sweat dripping from his jaw. Reed said nothing. Her silence became armor. But inside, deep inside, something else stirred. A memory she tried to keep buried. A rooftop inn, the weight of it in her hands. A shot so far, so impossible that even she doubted herself, until the trigger broke and the world went quiet and the enemy sniper fell from the minaret window. 800 meters, variable wind. A shot that should have been remembered in every sniper school in America. But it was, because Reed wasn't supposed to exist. The girl's face haunted her more than the shot. 7 years old, trembling in the corner of that bullet-riddled room, watching her father's body fall lifeless at her feet. That was the image Reed couldn't scrub from her mind. Not the kill, not the chaos. The eyes of a child staring at her as though she were a monster. And maybe she was. She never told anyone about that girl. Not Hayes, the commander who offered her a way out. Not Orr, who only saw her precision, never the cracks behind it. No one knew what she carried. That was the second thing about Reed. She never spoke of the weight, which made her silence at Fort Benning look like weakness to those who had no idea what silence could mean. That night in the gym, Blake and his little pack decided to test her. They cornered her near the weight racks, throwing insults like grenades. Carter picked up a combat knife, tossed it her way with a smirk. The knife never hit the floor. Her hand snapped up, catching the blade midair with precision too fast for their eyes to follow. For a heartbeat, the room went still. Her posture shifted, weight balanced, blade held with a grip only special operators used. Her eyes flickered predator's eyes. Then just as quickly, the mask slid back in place. She set the knife gently on the bench and said, "We're done here." But Wilson, standing in the shadows, saw more. He saw the scar on her forearm when her sleeve pulled back. A scar his father bore too, from an IED attack on Route Irish, 2007. A scar from an incident Reed wasn't listed in. An incident that officially never happened. Wilson asked her about it later, quiet and cautious. She didn't answer, but her hand lingered on the scar long after he left, as though remembering more than she wanted to. And Harrison, watching from a distance, finally allowed himself to worry, because he had seen this before, once, long ago in Berlin, when a soldier became more than a soldier, when conditioning blurred the line between human and weapon, when silence wasn't weakness but programming. He called it then and he called it now, sleepwalker. The question wasn't whether Reed would wake. The question was what would happen when she did. She lay in her bunk that night, staring at the ceiling, the card Hayes had once given her burning in her memory. Project Edelweiss. Call this number when you're ready. She never had, maybe because she already knew what saying yes would mean. But sometimes, she wondered if she had ever really said no. Because when she closed her eyes, she didn't sleep. She replayed the child's face, the shot, the silence, and deep inside, something whispered words she refused to hear. The child is in danger. Wake up now. That was only the beginning. Why did she sit in the corner while the simulation burned around her? Alarms wailing, her squad falling one by one. Captain Blake stormed past her, shouting orders, charging into plywood hallways filled with smoke and paint rounds. Mitchell, Carter, Wilson, they all threw themselves into the fight. Reed just lowered herself to the floor, back against the wall, eyes closed, breathing as if she were somewhere else entirely. It looked like cowardice, it looked like surrender, but it was. Colonel Harrison watched from the booth above, his weathered hand tightening on the edge of the console. He'd seen this before. Not the details, the plywood walls, the shouting recruits, but the pattern, the stillness, the withdrawal. The way Reed's body sat perfectly upright, no sagging spine, no tremor of fear. She wasn't broken. She was waiting. Waiting for what? Down below, Blake's squad collapsed in under 90 seconds. Paint marked their vests, sensors buzzing, each one dead. Blake himself lay sprawled, his chest tagged, face red with fury and humiliation. And Reed, she hadn't fired a shot, hadn't moved an inch. "Rear security maintained," she said evenly when Blake confronted her. His rage nearly broke into violence, only held back by Sergeant Major's looming presence. Didn't bother to hide his contempt. "One more failure, Reed, and you're out. This is your last chance." She nodded once, no defense, no protest, just silence. But when she walked out, there was something flickering in her eyes. Not fear, not shame, something else. A light long buried. That night the whispers grew sharper. Sleepwalker, dead weight, nap time. The insults floated through the chow hall like ash. Mitchell said she'd get someone killed. Carter said she was a disgrace. Blake said nothing, but his silence was the heaviest of all because silence meant calculation. Reed ate alone, as she always did. Every bite measured, every movement controlled. No one noticed how her eyes scanned the room, counting exits, cataloging threats, building that map again. Wilson noticed. Wilson, the youngest, still green, still carrying fragments of innocence despite what his father had carried home from Iraq. He had seen Reed catch that knife. He had seen the scar. He had seen the way she moved when she thought no one was watching. And he couldn't shake the thought. She wasn't failing because she couldn't. She was failing because she chose to. Later that night, he found her in the gym. The sound drew him first, the steady rhythm of fists striking a heavy bag. Not sloppy, not wild, but precise. Each hit landed exactly where it was meant to, the kind of precision no combatives class ever taught. She flowed around the bag like water. Elbows, knees, strikes that weren't for sparring or defense but for killing. Not moves to pass an evaluation, but moves designed to end a life. Wilson froze in the doorway. The transformation was terrifying. This wasn't the passive, distant soldier from training. This was something else, something predatory. Then she sensed him. Her head snapped toward the door, eyes sharp enough to pin him where he stood. "Who's there?" "Just me, Wilson." He lifted his hand slightly, almost as if surrendering. She relaxed, or rather she put the mask back on. The shift was so complete, so immediate, Wilson almost doubted what he'd seen. Almost. "You shouldn't be here," she said, unwinding the tape from her fists. "Neither should you," he said. "It's after hours." "I have insomnia." Wilson gave a nervous smile. "Funny, you seem to sleep just fine during training exercises." The smile vanished from her face, her eyes fixed on him, recalculating. "What do you want, Private?" "I want to understand," he said. "What you just did, that's not Army training. That's not even Special Forces. That's something else. And that scar, it matches my father's. He was 10th Mountain, Route Irish, 2007. You couldn't have been there, not according to your record." Something flickered in her expression. Recognition or memory or pain. "Your father made it home," she said finally. "Not everyone did." Wilson stepped closer. He was never the same. Nightmares. Times when he'd just check out like his mind wasn't there anymore. Kind of like you during training. Reed froze as if listening to something only she could hear. Her voice, when it came, was different. Lower. Sharper. "Some soldiers are trained to fight. Others are trained to disappear. Which do you think is harder, Private?" Wilson's heart pounded. He thought of his father's rambling about recall protocols, words no one else understood. He thought of Reed's scar, her silence, her refusal to fire. He thought of the way she just moved like a ghost around that bag. "They did something to you," he whispered. Her eyes softened for just a moment, not pity, not anger, something like sorrow. "They did something to all of us, your father, me, others you'll never hear about." He wanted to ask more, but she shut down again, mask back in place. "Get some rest, Private. Tomorrow's evaluation will be harder." "What about you?" She glanced at the bag still swaying. "I need to clear my head." He lingered at the door. "Whatever they did to you, it isn't right." Her voice followed him out, softer than before. "Very little about war is right. The danger begins when someone decides the rules no longer apply." He turned, but she wasn't looking at him anymore. She was already striking again. Controlled, relentless, mechanical. And when the door closed behind him, she froze mid-strike, hands to her temples, whispering to herself. Not now, not yet. The walls inside her mind trembled. The next morning dawned gray, the air heavy with rain and dread. The final evaluation loomed, Operation Urban Ghost. Hostage rescue. Full urban warfare simulation. The kind of test designed to break weak soldiers and prove the strong. Blake briefed the squad like he owned them. Mitchell on point, Carter on 6, Wilson rear, Reed. He didn't even bother assigning her. Just try not to get in the way. She nodded, no protest, no change in expression, but inside something stirred. Above in the observation booth, Harrison watched. Harrison's face was carved with worry. With something else, determination. "She's still in standby," said. "No signs of activation." "Maybe she really is decommissioned," Harrison muttered. Maybe she's done. His jaw tightened, or maybe she just needs the right trigger. He leaned into the radio. Initiate enhanced protocols. Authorization 7 Alpha Tango. In the control room, technicians looked uneasy, but they obeyed. The simulation changed instantly, harder, louder, more chaotic. The squad hit the breach. Smoke, strobe lights, shouts, hostiles. Blake charged forward, Mitchell at his side, Carter covering, Wilson behind. And Reed, she sat in her corner, eyes closed, breathing slow. Rear security maintained, she whispered to herself. The others fought and fell. Blake tagged out, chest buzzer blaring. Carter splattered with paint down. Mitchell, furious and raging, pushed longer than the rest, but he too collapsed under the numbers. Wilson was alone, pinned, surrounded, seconds from elimination. And Reed still sat motionless. Leaned into the radio again. Execute final protocol, recall mode, authorization Edelweiss November Delta. The words echoed through the speakers. Reed didn't move. 10 seconds, 15. Harrison exhaled, relief softening his shoulders. Looks like she's truly decommissioned. His eyes narrowed. Not yet. He picked up the mic one last time, his voice shifting, deeper, slower, with a rhythm designed to cut through walls in the human mind. Sleepwalker Actual, this is Control, emergency override. The child is in danger. Repeat, the child is in danger. Activation code Sierra Tango 371. Wake up now. The room held its breath. Reed's body went still, not just quiet, not just calm, still like death. Then her eyes snapped open. They weren't the same eyes. Not the eyes of the silent soldier mocked by her peers, not the calm observer cataloging threats. These eyes were sharper, predatory, alive. Reed stood, and for the first time she was awake. What did Wilson see in her eyes when they snapped open? Fear, rage, or something worse? He froze in the narrow hallway, rounds slamming into the wall inches from his head, role players pressing in from both sides. He had seconds left before the buzzer on his vest marked him as dead. Then he heard it, the sudden, sharp click of a rifle being charged behind him. Reed rose from the corner. Her movements were unlike anything the squad had seen in weeks of training. There was no hesitation, no wasted motion, no fumbling with stance or grip. She flowed forward with terrifying efficiency, her rifle already aligned before the hostiles could react. 3 shots, 3 hits, all to the faceplates of the aggressors. They dropped instantly, sensors wailing. Wilson flinched, but she wasn't aiming at him. She wasn't even looking at him. Her eyes scanned, calculated, dismissed, moved on. "Stay behind me," she ordered. Wilson didn't argue. In the booth above, Harrison's heart sank. "James, what have you done?" Didn't answer. His face betrayed grim satisfaction. Down in the maze of plywood walls, Reed moved like a phantom. She didn't hug cover like the others. She didn't freeze at corners, waiting for angles. She predicted. She moved before threats revealed themselves, sliding into firing positions as if she'd seen the scenario run 100 times before. The first group of hostiles had prepared an ambush. 3 men, interlocking fields of fire, angles that should have pinned any squad. Reed broke them in 4 seconds. Her first shot drilled the point man's mask before he even raised his weapon. She dropped flat, sliding across the floor in a blur, firing upward into the second man's. Before the third could adjust, she was already behind him, disarming him with a movement too fast for the cameras to track. A knife hand struck to his throat, followed by a sim blade pressed to his artery. Eliminated. Wilson watched, stunned. He'd trained with her for weeks, mocked her silence, resented her passivity. Now he saw something else entirely, not just skill, not training, something beyond human. "Who are you?" he whispered, his voice trembling. She didn't look at him. "Move." They advanced deeper into the complex. Smoke thickened, Alarms blared, the chaos of the simulation designed to overwhelm. Reed cut through it like it wasn't even there, every step deliberate, every shot perfect. In the booth leaned forward. She's operational, fully functional, just like before. Before, Harrison repeated, his voice bitter. And how did before end in Berlin, James? Ignored him. His eyes stayed locked on the monitors. Reed and Wilson reached the central courtyard. There, the real test waited. 4 hostiles surrounded the hostage, weapons raised, angles tight, ready to shred anyone who entered. Blake had tried to plan for this earlier. He'd drawn lines on maps, whispered orders about breaches and distractions. But Blake was out, tagged dead minutes ago. His plans lay forgotten. Reed didn't need plans. She read the room in a glance. Her breathing slowed, her heartbeat dropped. Wilson could almost feel it, the way she emptied herself, clearing out hesitation, leaving only calculation. Then she moved. She burst through the doorway in a blur, shifting faster than eyes could follow. One shot dead center to the mask of the first guard. A roll, a pivot, 2 more shots in perfect sequence, each passing within inches of the hostage's head to strike the captors hiding behind him. The 4th tried to adjust, shoving the hostage forward as cover. Reed didn't hesitate. She shifted half a step, angle perfect, double tap to the chest. 4 men down, the hostage untouched. Wilson just stared, his mouth dry, heart racing, trying to process what he'd just seen. That was standard, she cut him off, already pulling the hostage behind her, scanning for more threats. Standard, his voice cracked, that was. Move, she ordered again. And he did, because for the first time in his young life, Wilson realized he wasn't the soldier in charge of his own survival. He was cargo, and she was the carrier. They pressed toward the extraction point. Role players threw everything at them, strobe grenades, heavy fire, ambushes from balconies and corners. None of it mattered. Reed dismantled each scenario with inhuman calm. Above, Harrison shook his head in disbelief. She's not just good, she's perfect, finished for him. His eyes shone with something dangerous. This is why Edelweiss existed. This is the future. No, Harrison snapped. This is the past, the worst of it. You're playing with something you can't control. His jaw tightened. Control is the point, Bill, and as you can see, it works. Harrison looked at Reed's eyes on the monitor, those sharp, predatory eyes that belonged to something half human, half weapon. He didn't see control. He saw a fuse. Inside the simulation, Reed led Wilson and the hostage into the open courtyard where the extraction zone waited. She stopped. For the first time since she'd woken up, she froze. Not from hesitation, from recognition. The hostage was a man in his 50s, an actor in fatigues. But something about the way he cowered, the way his eyes widened, it triggered something. A memory. A girl 7 years old, trembling, watching her father fall. Reed's breathing hitched. Her rifle wavered by a fraction. Wilson noticed. He had been watching her so closely, studying every movement that even the smallest crack stood out. Sergeant, what is it? Her jaw clenched. Nothing. But her hands betrayed her. They trembled. Above, Harrison leaned forward. James, she's flashing. His eyes narrowed. No, she's fine. On the monitors, Reed blinked rapidly, like someone fighting against 2 realities. The courtyard around her, and the dusty room the man beside her, and the child staring at her through the scope of memory. Wilson touched her shoulder. Sergeant, you're shaking. Her head snapped toward him, eyes blazing. For a moment he thought she'd strike him. Then she took a breath, forced control back into her voice. Stay with the hostage. I'll clear the LZ. She stepped forward, firing precise shots into the final role players guarding the landing zone. Every round struck exactly where it needed to. Her hands no longer trembled. Her mask was back in place. Minutes later, they reached the zone. The simulation ended. Lights came up, sirens cut off, silence fell. Reed stood motionless, her rifle lowered, posture still radiating lethal readiness. The room was filled with paint-splattered soldiers staring at her in shock. Blake stepped forward, his face twisted with anger and something else, respect he couldn't quite hide. "What the hell was that?" he asked, his voice rough. Reed turned her head slowly. Her eyes softened, the predator fatting. Her mask slipped back into place. "That," she said quietly, "was me doing my job." Then she walked away. Above, Harrison whispered, "You've opened Pandora's box, James. You think you're holding it shut, but you're not." Didn't answer. His smile was answer enough. What did she remember when the lights came back on? The plywood walls, the paint-splattered bodies, the buzzing alarms, all of it faded behind her eyes. What lingered instead was the face of a child. Wide-eyed, trembling, 7 years old. She had seen it before, years ago in. Now it haunted her again, as if her mind had pulled it through time, stitching memory into the present. Reed didn't speak as the cadre dismissed the squad. She didn't sit with them in the mess, didn't listen to Blake's furious whispering, didn't answer Wilson's tentative questions. She just walked, each step steady, each breath controlled, as though the world hadn't just watched her transform into something lethal and inhuman. But Harrison had watched, and he knew. In the secure briefing room, reinforced concrete muffling the outside world, Reed sat alone. A steel table, 2 chairs, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. She didn't fidget, she didn't shift. She simply sat, eyes scanning exit's mind. The door opened. Colonel entered first, a recorder in his hand, his expression smooth. Harrison followed, his jaw tight, his weathered face drawn in shadows. "Quite a performance," began, placing the recorder on the table. His voice was too calm, too measured. "For the record, this debriefing is classified, top secret, special access required." Reed's gaze flicked to the device, then back to him. "Understood, sir." "Do you remember what happened?" asked. A pause, her breathing remained even. "Yes, sir. Hostiles engaged, targets neutralized, hostage secured, extraction complete." Harrison leaned forward. "That's the report. I asked what you remember." Reed's eyes narrowed slightly. The question was different, dangerous. "I remember doing my job." Her voice was steady, but Harrison saw it, the flicker in her pupils, the faint tension at the corner of her jaw. She remembered more than she was saying. Cut in smoothly. "Her performance exceeded expectations, better than any operator we've had in years. She's viable." "Viable?" Harrison snapped, his voice echoing in the room. "She's not a system, James. She's a soldier, a human being, and you just pulled her strings like a marionette." Reed's eyes shifted between them. A realization crept into her posture. "Strings," she repeated softly. Ignored her. "Bill, you saw what I saw. She's operational. The conditioning holds. She's proof the program can be revived." Harrison slammed his fist on the table. "The program should stay dead. You think you control her. You don't. You think you can predict what happens when those walls in her head crack. You can't." Reed spoke then, her voice calm but edged with steel. "What program?" The silence in the room was heavier than any answer. Jaw tightened. Harrison cursed under his breath. Reed leaned forward. "What program?" Tried to pivot. "You were part of a specialized training initiative after advanced combat readiness. You were selected because of your skills." "Don't lie to me," Reed cut in, her voice sharper now. "I know what training looks like. This isn't it. This is something else. What did you do to me?" Harrison's eyes softened. He saw the fractured lines in her voice, the cracks in her controlled mask. She wasn't just asking as a soldier. She was asking as a human being desperate for answers. Kept his voice cold. "You volunteered. You knew what you were agreeing to." "No," she said flatly, "I didn't." Harrison put a hand on the table, leaning closer. "Listen to me. Back then, they called it Project Edelweiss. They took soldiers with extraordinary skills and extraordinary trauma. They partitioned your mind, built walls. They taught you how to disappear inside yourself until someone spoke the words to bring you back. Reed's eyes darkened. Sleepwalker. Harrison nodded once. Yes, that's what they called you. That's why you sit down in the middle of drills. That's why you don't fire when you can. It's not weakness, it's programming. They buried parts of you, and when gave the command, he pulled those parts back. Her hand tightened into a fist on the table. For the first time, her composure faltered. You're telling me every choice I've made here, every failure, it wasn't me. Harrison shook his head. It was you, but it was the part of you they left behind. The rest they locked away. His voice cut through, colder than ice. And now it's unlocked. Reed's breath hitched. The child's face flickered again in her mind. The shot, the scream that never left her, she swallowed hard. What happens, she asked, if I don't want to be unlocked? Didn't answer. Harrison did. Then you fight it. You remember who you are, not what they made you. The silence stretched. Reed looked between them, one man who saw her as a weapon, another who saw her as a soldier, and she didn't know which was worse. Finally stood. Debrief over. Staff Sergeant Reed is cleared for continuation. Harrison pushed back his chair violently. Continuation? After what you just did? James, this is reckless. Orders from SOCOM snapped. She stays. The door closed behind them, leaving Reed alone. She sat in silence, breathing steadily, fists unclenching one finger at a time. On the table, the recorder's red light still blinked, recording every breath, every silence. She whispered to herself, not now, not yet. And for the first time, she wasn't sure if the words were hers or theirs. That night, Wilson couldn't sleep. He replayed the simulation over and over, Reed moving like a ghost, her eyes unrecognizable. He remembered the scar, his father's nightmares, the strange words whispered after too much bourbon, recall protocols, cognitive partitioning. He found her in the gym again, sitting alone, not striking the bag this time, just sitting, hands resting on her knees, eyes closed. You weren't sleeping, he said quietly. Her eyes opened, calm and dark. No. What are you? He asked. She studied him for a long time before answering. I'm not sure anymore. Wilson swallowed. They're using you. Her voice was soft, almost tender. They used your father too. His breath caught. Then what's the point? Why are you still here? She looked away, her gaze distant. Because sometimes the only way out is through. Wilson wanted to press her to ask what that meant, but he didn't. Because in her voice he heard something he hadn't before, not just calculation, not just control, something fragile, something human. And that, he realized, might be the most dangerous part of all. Why did Blake stare at her across the mess hall that morning? Not with mockery this time, but with something closer to fear. The whispers had changed. They weren't jokes anymore. No one called her nap time or dead weight. Now the word carried a different weight when it passed between them. Sleepwalker, not an insult, a warning. Reed felt it pressing in from every angle. The silence when she entered a room. The way conversations died when she walked by. The subtle shift of bodies, giving her space as if she carried something contagious. But she ate the same way she always did. Alone, measured bites, slow, deliberate breathing. The difference wasn't in her, it was in them. Wilson sat down across from her. It was a small act, but in the quiet of the mess hall it might as well have been a gunshot. Eyes darted toward him. Blake scowled. Mitchell muttered something under his breath. Reed looked up at Wilson. That's a mistake. He met her gaze steadily. Then I'll make it twice. For a moment something softened in her eyes. A flicker of not gratitude, something quieter, recognition. Why? She asked. Because I've seen what you can do, Wilson said, and because I think I know why you don't always do it. Her fork stilled, she didn't answer. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. You're not failing, you're holding back, because if you didn't, he shook his head, it wouldn't be training anymore, it'd be war. Her silence was confirmation enough. Blake slammed his tray down beside them. "You think you're clever, Wilson. You think sitting with her makes you special." His eyes locked on Reed. "You think what you did yesterday proves anything. You're still a coward. You hid through every drill until they whispered the magic words. Without that, you're nothing." Reed's eyes didn't leave his. Calm, steady. "Then maybe you should pray they never whisper them to you." Blake's jaw clenched. For a moment, Reed thought he might strike her. Instead, he shoved his tray away and stormed out, his pride bleeding where his fists couldn't. Wilson exhaled. "You shouldn't have said that." She returned to her food. He needed to hear it. But later, when she sat in her bunk staring at the ceiling, she wondered if she'd spoken out of control, or out of something else entirely. In the command office, the argument between Harrison and reached its boiling point. "You saw her hesitate," Harrison said, slamming a file onto the desk. "You saw her break in that courtyard. She's not a weapon, James, she's a person, and people don't stay contained forever." Leaned back unbothered. And yet when it mattered, she performed flawlessly. Hostage rescued. 0 casualties. That's not hesitation, that's humanity. And humanity is an acceptable flaw so long as the program holds. "Flaw," Harrison barked. "That's the only thing keeping her human. Without it, she's not a soldier. She's a machine in uniform." His voice cooled. "Machines obey. Soldiers question. I know which one I prefer when lives are at stake." Harrison glared at him, his chest heaving. "You keep pushing her, James, and you're going to get people killed. Not because she'll fail, but because she won't." Smiled thinly. "Then maybe that's exactly what we need." 2 days later, the squad was called for night maneuvers. Live fire training in the forest. Low moonlight. Rain slicking the ground. Blake's leadership had frayed under Reed's shadow. He barked orders with more venom than clarity, determined to reassert control. His team followed grudgingly, their glances sliding toward Reed as if waiting for her to move first. She didn't. She walked at the rear, her rifle low, eyes scanning the tree line. Every step she measured distances, marked shadows, built her map. Halfway through the exercise, the ambush came. Sim rounds snapped from the trees, tracer flares slicing through the dark. The squad scattered, shouting, firing blindly. Chaos reigned. Blake cursed, trying to rally them. His words drowned in gunfire. Mitchell went down first, tagged by a burst. Carter followed, his vest buzzing red. Wilson scrambled behind cover, firing controlled shots. His eyes darted toward Reed. She wasn't firing, not yet. She crouched low, breathing calm, her eyes half closed. She wasn't looking at the fight in front of her. She was listening, counting shots, measuring cadence, calculating reload cycles. Then she moved. Her rifle snapped to her shoulder. 3 shots in rhythm left tree line mid-slope high ridge. 3 role players tagged, their sensors wailing. She dropped prone, rolled, fired again. 2 more down. The forest went silent, just like that. Blake stared at her, chest heaving, face pale. His entire squad had been routed. She had ended the ambush alone. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Reed rose slowly, brushing mud from her knee. Her expression gave nothing away. Wilson finally spoke. "That wasn't training." Her eyes flicked to him. "Neither is war." That night she dreamt of the girl again. The shot, the silence afterward, but in the dream the child spoke. "Why didn't you save me?" Reed woke with her fists clenched, her pulse hammering. She sat on the edge of her bunk, breathing hard, whispering to herself. Not now, not yet. She wasn't sure if she was talking about the dream or the program inside her. The next morning, Harrison cornered her outside the range. His voice was low, urgent. "You don't have to let them do this to you," he said. Her eyes narrowed. "What choice do I have?" "You always have a choice," Harrison pressed. "That's what makes you human. We'll tell you otherwise, but he's wrong. You can walk away." Reed studied him for a long moment. "And what happens to the ones who can't? to the next soldier they put through this. Harrison's mouth opened, but no answer came, because she was right. She walked past him, her footsteps echoing. And Harrison realized with a sinking weight that the battle for Reed wasn't between him and it was inside her. And he didn't know which side would win. Why was she the only one ordered to report to the airfield at 200, her gear packed but her squad left behind? The hangar smelled of jet fuel and wet concrete, floodlights throwing harsh cones of light across the tarmac. A transport sat waiting, engines low, its fuselage marked only with faded stencils. No unit insignia, no flag. Reed stood alone beneath the lights. No briefing, no mission packet, just an order, report, full kit, immediate readiness. Emerged from the shadows, his voice carrying the clipped authority of a man who never wasted words. Staff Sergeant Reed, you've been selected for a field assignment. Her posture didn't change. Where? Overseas, classified. She studied him, eyes narrowed. Why me and not the squad? Because they're not ready, he said flatly. You are. Harrison's voice broke in from behind. He strode across the hangar floor, his face drawn tight with frustration. James, this is reckless. She just came out of activation 2 days ago. You throw her into the field now and you don't know what you're unleashing. Didn't even look at him. We'll see. Reed's gaze shifted between them. She caught what Harrison wasn't saying. What you're unleashing, not who. Her chest tightened, but she nodded anyway, because saying no was never really an option. The flight was silent. No chatter from no nervous jokes, just the drone of engines and the hum of her own thoughts. She tried to rest, but every time her eyes closed, the girl from returned. This time she wasn't standing in the corner. This time she was walking toward Reed, eyes full of accusation. Reed woke with her fists clenched around the rifle across her chest. She breathed slow, steady. She told herself the words that had become her anchor. Not now, not yet. The pilot's voice crackled through the intercom. Approaching drop zone, 10 minutes. She checked her kit, movements automatic. Rifle, sidearm, blades, ammo, comms, everything in its place. But inside, nothing felt in place. The mission was a ghost. No insignia, no acknowledgments, just coordinates in the mountains near the border of a country whose name wouldn't appear in any official report. Briefing, delivered in clipped sentences on the transport, was all she had. A high-value target is believed to be sheltering in a compound here. Local assets failed to neutralize. You'll do what they couldn't. And if I refuse, she asked. His eyes had narrowed, cold and unblinking. You won't. Now she crouched on the ridge, the compound sprawling below her in moonlight. Guards paced the perimeter. A satellite dish turned lazily atop the roof. Her rifle lay steady against her shoulder, scope adjusted, distance calculated, 1,200 meters, wind 5 knots east, elevation drop accounted for. It should have been routine, but her finger hovered over the trigger, unmoving. Because in the scope she saw not a man, not a hostile, not a target. She saw the child again, the one from staring at her through the crosshairs. Her breathing caught, her hands trembled. Control, this is Reed, she whispered into comms. Target in sight, no shot taken. Static hissed back, then's voice colder than the night air, take the shot. Her chest tightened. Request confirmation, civilians may be present. Negative, snapped. Authorization stands, take the shot. She exhaled, fighting the tremor in her hands. She pressed her cheek harder against the stock, eyes narrowing on the figure through the glass. And then she lowered the rifle. No shot. The silence on the net was heavier than any reprimand. Seconds later, a voice she hadn't expected crackled through her earpiece. Harrison, somehow patched in. Reed, listen to me. You don't have to obey him, not anymore. Her breath hitched. They'll burn me for this. Maybe, Harrison said, but better burned as yourself than used as their weapon. The words hit harder than the recoil of any rifle. Below, the compound stirred, guards shifted, lights flared. The window of action closed, and with it Reed's chance to prove or deny what she was. Extraction was chaos. Reed moved through the forest like a shadow, evading patrols, her suppressed shots dropping sentries when escape left no other option. But her chest ached with every pull of the trigger, because each shot felt less like survival and more like surrender. By dawn, she was on the chopper, rain streaking down the open ramp. Sat opposite her, his jaw tight, his silence sharp. Finally, he spoke. "You disobeyed a direct order." Reed stared at him across the cabin. "I made a choice." "You don't get choices," said. Her voice was steady. "Then maybe I'm not what you think I am." For the first time, his composure cracked. His eyes narrowed, his lips curling into something between a snarl and a smile. "You think you're free, but you'll learn. When the words are spoken, you'll act, whether you want to or not." She didn't answer. She just looked past him at the rain slicing through the dawn. Inside, though, the war raged. Back at base, the squad greeted her return with silence. Blake scowled. Mitchell muttered. Carter shook his head. Only Wilson looked at her with something else, concern. That night he found her again in the gym. She wasn't striking the bag. She wasn't lifting. She just sat, her back against the wall, eyes hollow. "You didn't take the shot," he said softly. Her eyes flicked to him. "How do you know?" "Because you're still shaking." She looked down at her hands. They trembled in her lap, faint but undeniable. Wilson sat beside her. "Whatever they did to you, you're still in there. I can see it. You don't have to be what they want." She closed her eyes. "Then what am I supposed to be?" He didn't answer. He just sat with her, the silence between them heavy but shared. And for the first time since she'd arrived at Fort Benning, Reed didn't feel completely alone. Why did the order come in the middle of the night? With no warning, no briefing, just a voice over comms whispering the words that made her blood turn cold. "Sleepwalker actual, emergency directive, confirm readiness." Reed sat up in her bunk, the barracks still dark around her, the others breathing in heavy sleep. She didn't answer. Not right away. Her hands trembled against the thin blanket, her chest tight. The words repeated, sharper this time. "Emergency directive, confirm readiness." Her lips parted, her throat working to form the answer, but she forced it back down. Not now, not yet. She rose silently, slipping into her boots, strapping her vest over her shirt. The card Harrison had once given her, creased, worn, burned in her pocket. The number she'd never called. The one that promised truth but also chains. She walked out into the cool night, the weight of the words pressing harder than any rucksack she'd ever carried. In the command center, Harrison stormed through the doors, his voice sharp with anger. "James, what the hell are you doing? You're pulling her in the middle of the night, without briefing, without prep." Didn't look up from the console. "It's time to prove what she is." "She's a soldier, not your experiment," Harrison snapped. His eyes flicked up, cold and certain. "She's both, and tonight we'll see which one wins." The mission was simple on paper. A rogue cell had surfaced in the city, armed and dug in. The squad would deploy, neutralize, and extract. Standard counter-terror. Except it wasn't standard. Reed saw it the moment they loaded onto the transport. The details were wrong. The intel was too clean. The timing too perfect. This wasn't combat, it was theater. And she was the lead actor. Blake sat across from her, jaw clenched, still burning from weeks of humiliation. "When the bullets fly, don't think your little ghost tricks will save you this time," he muttered. She didn't answer. Wilson beside her shot Blake a warning look, but his eyes returned to Reed, full of something else. Worry. He leaned closer, his voice low. "Something off, you feel it too." Reed nodded once, that was all. The city was silent when they landed. Too silent, streets empty, windows dark. The squad moved in formation, rifles sweeping alleys, eyes scanning rooftops. Reed trailed at the rear, every sense stretched thin. Then it came, the ambush. Explosions tearing through parked cars, muzzle flashes from second-story windows. The squad dove for cover, firing back in panic. Mitchell cursed, Carter shouted, Blake barked orders drowned in chaos. And Reed froze. Her body locked, her breathing slowed. The words from the comms whispered again in her skull. Emergency directive. Confirm readiness. She pressed her back to the wall, eyes shut, trying to push it away. Wilson grabbed her shoulder, shouting over the gunfire, Reed, we need you. Her eyes snapped open. They weren't hers anymore. They were sharper, harder, programmed. She rose from cover, her rifle snapping to her shoulder, firing controlled bursts. Every hostile fell in perfect sequence. Movement flowed through her like water, her body shifting angles, clearing windows, dismantling the ambush in seconds. When silence returned, the squad stared at her breathless. Blake's voice cracked. What the hell are you? Reed's rifle lowered. Her voice was flat, effective. They moved deeper into the city. Reed led now, her pace unstoppable, her instincts unerring. Wilson stayed close, whispering to her, You're not yourself right now. I can see it. Fight it. Her jaw clenched. Not now. Then when, he pressed. She didn't answer. The target building loomed ahead, a crumbling warehouse, shadows alive in its broken windows. His voice came through comms, smooth and sharp. Reed, you are primary. Confirm readiness. Her lips moved without her permission. Confirmed. The squad froze at her tone. Even Blake, so eager to mock, looked unsettled. They breached. Inside, role players again. She knew it instantly. Their movements were wrong, too controlled, their gear mismatched, and in the center of the room, tied to a chair, a hostage. A child. Her rifle wavered. The others didn't see it. They shouted, fired, advanced. But she saw only the girl from wide-eyed, trembling, waiting for her father to fall again. His voice cut sharp through comms. Execute, neutralize hostiles, secure the package. Her breathing faltered. She raised her rifle. Her finger touched the trigger. And then, Don't, Wilson's voice said beside her. Low, steady, human. That's not a target, that's a test. They're using you. She froze, torn between the command in her ear and the plea at her side, between programming and humanity. The child looked at her. No, the actor playing the child, but in Reed's eyes it was the same, 7 years old. Her finger tightened on the trigger. Sergeant, Wilson whispered. His hand touched her arm, light but grounding. Please make a choice. The world narrowed. His order, Harrison's warning, the child's face, Wilson's voice. Reed exhaled and lowered her rifle. She turned, firing instead at the cameras mounted in the corners. Sparks flew, lenses shattered, feeds cut to static. Control, she said into comms, her voice steel. I am not your weapon. Above in the command booth, his face contorted with fury. Terminate the exercise, now. Harrison grabbed his arm. No, you wanted proof. You just got it, she chose. In the warehouse, silence hung heavy. The role players lowered their weapons, confused. The squad stared at Reed, their chests heaving. Blake's voice broke the quiet. She disobeyed a direct order. Reed turned to him slowly, eyes calmer now. No, I made a choice. Wilson stood at her side, and that's what makes her more soldier than the rest of us. The words settled like a stone in the room. Reed dropped her rifle, the weight of it pulling at her hands. She felt exhausted, hollow, but also free. For the first time in years, she had acted on her own. Why did the base go into lockdown the moment she walked out of the warehouse, her rifle still in her hands, her silence heavier than the storm building above? Sirens wailed across the compound. Red lights spun. Gates slammed shut. It wasn't an after-action debrief. It wasn't a drill. This was containment. His voice crackled through the loudspeakers, cold and sharp. Staff Sergeant Reed, stand down. You are in violation of direct orders. Surrender immediately." Reed kept walking. The squad followed at her back, caught between fear and loyalty. Mitchell whispered, "She's finished." Carter muttered, "We should cut her loose." But Wilson stepped forward, his voice steady. "No, she's not done, she just started." Blake clenched his jaw, torn in silence. His pride hated her, but his eyes had seen what she did, what none of them could. And for the first time he didn't mock, he didn't lead, he just followed. In the command center, Harrison pushed past operators trying to seal doors. He stormed into his office, his fury unmasked. "You turned the base into a cage," Harrison spat. "For what? Because she disobeyed." His eyes burned. "Because she is unstable, and instability in a weapon is unacceptable." "She's not a weapon," Harrison thundered. "She's a soldier. She made a choice. That's the difference." Stood, slamming his fists onto the table. "Choice is weakness. Choice is the reason soldiers die while targets escape. We built her to remove choice." Harrison leaned in, his voice low, dangerous. "You built her to erase her humanity, and tonight she proved you failed." Outside, Reed walked to the center of the courtyard. Armed guards ringed the space, rifles raised, eyes darting. She didn't raise her weapon. She didn't run. She just stood there, rain dripping from her hair, her chest rising and falling slowly. Wilson stepped beside her. "What's the plan?" Her eyes never left the ring of rifles. "Survive." "And after that?" A pause, live. The word hung between them, unfamiliar on her tongue. The guards advanced. Safety switches clicked. The voice roared over the loudspeakers. "Final warning, surrender or be neutralized." Reed exhaled, closed her eyes. For a moment, Wilson thought she would give in, that the programming would snap shut around her like chains. But when her eyes opened, they weren't the eyes of a machine. They were hers, human, alive. She dropped her rifle to the ground. The clang echoed across the courtyard. "I'm done being your weapon," she said, her voice steady. "If you want to end this, do it." The guards hesitated, fingers on triggers, breaths held. No one moved. Because in her voice, in her stance, they heard something no order could erase: dignity. His command crackled in their earpieces, furious. "Fire." No one pulled the trigger. Harrison's voice cut across the net, iron in his tone. "Stand down, that's an order." Silence, then slowly rifles lowered. Reed's chest loosened for the first time in years. Later, in the quiet of Harrison's office, she sat across from him. Rain tapped against the window. The card haze had once given her lay on the desk between them. "You could walk away," Harrison said softly. "No court-martial, no chains, I'll make sure of it. But once you leave, there's no coming back." She stared at the card, the number, the past it represented. "I don't know how to live outside of this," she admitted. "Then learn," Harrison said. "Not as their soldier, not as their experiment, as you." Her throat tightened. She hadn't realized until then how much she needed someone to say those words. Wilson appeared in the doorway, hesitant. "We're with you, Sergeant, whatever you decide." Reed looked at him, then back at Harrison. Slowly, she reached out and picked up the card. She didn't rip it. She didn't call it. She just slid it into her pocket. A choice not theirs, hers. That night she sat alone beneath the stars outside the barracks. The storm had passed. The air smelled of wet earth. She closed her eyes. The child from appeared again, wide-eyed, trembling, but this time the girl wasn't accusing. She was just there. Reed whispered into the silence, "I couldn't save you, but I can save myself." And when she opened her eyes, the world felt different, heavy still, but hers to carry. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.